and I would like to welcome Gabriel Cosgrove to the stage. Gabriel is the General Manager for EMEA at expe.
Thank you, Thomas.
So good to see you, Gabriel.
Yeah, likewise, it's been a while.
Jet lagged?
No, not so bad. A little bit of travel lately, but I'm actually delighted to be back traveling in some ways. I've had 2.5 years of housebound, so
Yeah.
all good.
Yeah, no, that's
Delighted to be here.
And a lot of things happened since we sort of traveled the last time, and since we sort of were in this venue talking. And can you put some words to what happened?
Yeah. So, and I guess some people may know expe, some people may not. But in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of activity. And a lot of that activity is centralized around creating scale and bringing scale together, as well as solutions and experiences that we're going to talk about. And just to set some context on that, there's 5 different key areas of the businesses. We're obviously going to talk a lot about the TiVo business today. But in our connected car business, for example, we're in about 80 million cars because we own the HD radio business, which is the digital radio standard in the US. We're obviously been in the consumer electronics business for many years with DTS Audio and many others, which brings us into about 100 million TVs, which is very relevant for the connected TV conversations, as well as PCs, phones, and other things. But the TiVo business is in about 50 million households. Around 8 million of that is already in Europe. But the TiVo brand obviously is been very well known in the US, and part of the conversation I'll have today is really wide. It may not be necessary to have all of that up front as we partner with a lot of the TV guys. We've a dedicated monetization and ad sales, ad tech business, which is obviously key to the expansion we're talking about here and what we can offer partners in the world of monetization. And lastly, we have an IP licensing business, which is north of 11 million patents. So, which we'll actually separate the companies into 2 public companies later this year. So the IP business will go into a dedicated company, and expe, if you like, is going to focus primarily on products. So a little nugget for you there. Okay. But with that scale, you get a ton of content relationships and very close content relationships over many years, which the previous conversations we just heard was how do you enable some neutrality in content partners when you're bringing across search recommendations. And then last thing I would say, just on the context of the company, we have about 1,500 engineers that are primarily dedicated to video delivery services, right? So there's some scale there. So with that amount of different types of households, you deal with a lot of customers. So you get a lot of customer feedback, and you get a lot of strategy conversations with customers for many years. So, which brings us to this point.
Yeah, and earlier today in one of the panels, there was a request that you guys started doing mind reading, because it's actually quite hard to find content. So yeah, maybe you put some of those 1,500 engineers to work.
I heard from Charles, our marketing director, that we did a demo one time with a little mind reading thing. But yes. Recommendation engines and personalization, you'll hear about, is certainly evolving together with voice in a very productive way. We'll be able to share quite a lot of that in the coming months.
Yeah, and as Tom mentioned earlier, just beginning of this session, UX is the center, and TiVo has, I presume, sort of been the guardians of the UX historically. Yeah,
I thought Tom did a great job. I thought he would say why TiVo when he was talking about the UX being important, but thank you for that, Tom. But I think UX is super important, and really for engaging and captivating audiences and keeping them there. But and the TiVo 4K streaming stick that we launched probably 3 years ago in the US is that first taste of what you will see on the CTV OS level, where you get that advanced user experience together with the voice solutions and the search and recommendations engine. So 100% agree that the UX is really the primary focus. And one of the big things with talking about CTV OS and why it's important and what differentiates in some way is you get into that super aggregation of content. We've heard from many people that many people do it, including operators themselves as well as content providers. But that super unification of content, therefore leading to universal search, is really where I think we would differentiate quite strongly from a UX perspective.
Thanks, Gabriel. I want to pick up one of your things that you mentioned earlier with the separation. And your CEO, John Kirshner, mentioned this in your earnings call by the end of Q1, sort of the entrance into the world of smart TV operating systems and sort of the... Can you put a few more words to that?
Yeah, so, and John mentioned it at NAB as well, that we were entering the smart TV space. Obviously, as I mentioned, we have already huge relationships there in the TV space at the scale. So, you know, the strategy of bringing the TiVo and expe businesses together was to really evolve that into that OS level, where truly the ecosystem partnership and the monetization elements are more prevalent and more manageable, right? And I think our TV partners will really benefit from you know, the CTV OS space where we're going, and the solution we're bringing to the table from really three different ways. Our approach is powered by as opposed to controlled by, right? So it's a very different approach, as we want our TV partners to be front and center of owning the brand, owning the fact that it's essentially their platform, so to speak. So that's a different approach than maybe some of the big tech giants that have been referenced here. So the UX, it plays a huge role in that as it's standardized across that, as I mentioned, brand, but also roadmaps. You know, one of the challenges there with some of those big tech giants is once you get into that ecosystem, you're kind of controlled in that ecosystem, right? Where the partnership we're bringing to the table really is to work together on the roadmap in the future and differentiate that way. So the second point I would make is about content discovery and how easy that can become. It's a very, search and recommendation is one thing, but actually really getting into understanding and personalizing what people like to watch, particularly if there's multiple users in the house, for example. How do you differentiate between profiles? How do you differentiate between voice conversations, for example, as we move towards voice profiling in the future? But the other thing I'll say about voice and why it's important into finding what you want to watch and enjoy, as our tagline goes, is conversational voice is very different than instructive voice. We're not talking about changing channel numbers anymore. You're talking about, one of the cool demos the guy did recently at one of our TV partners' sites was just talking to the solution about, you know, I can't remember that movie that Tom Hanks was in that had a football in it. What is it? Right? And comes up, Castaway or whatever. So, and you can only get there when you have deep linked metadata as well as a strong, you know, combined back end. And I think TiVo has done a really powerful job there. So I'm excited about the CTOS side. The other thing I would say is our business model, as I mentioned, not only powered by, but our willingness to truly share revenue with partners. Right? That's a unique kind of, in some ways, different from an upfront bounty style, which is very typical, more so about reoccurring revenue for TV partners and operators in some cases. That really shows them that they have, you know, a lot more skin in the game rather than handing over data and handing over the advertising sales to other companies based on the platform. They're actually staying with the platform for a long time because their reoccurring revenue you know, only grows with scale. So it actually encourages more scale of footprint as well from a TV partner's perspective, which they're excited about. Yeah. Right.
And what are we looking at from a timing perspective? When are we going to see some
So
of this?
we will announce before the end of this year, and then we will for the 23 market. Yep.
Interesting. With these sort of integrations and more built-in solutions, are we no longer talking about the battle for HDMI 1 anymore, or?
That's a good question. You know, in some ways you could go at it from that angle, yeah, because, you know, if you can get what you need in front of the, whether you're searching with voice or you're searching directly in a central UX, I think the big thing is you're not switching out in and out of apps, and therefore you're less likely to change ports. Because if you can find what you're looking for through the same unified front end, then you're less likely to move away from that. Because the universal search will go across linear channels, AVOD, SVOD, it doesn't matter. So you saw in the video there the way they all come up from a sources perspective. So that brings a bit of neutrality from who pops up first. There are other advertising methods of who goes first on what part of the screen. That's all there as well. But that core concept of just being able to search across any source, makes it sticky. Right?
Yeah, it's quite interesting that you see that there's opportunity for more players in this space, because as we've heard throughout this, and again this morning, that Google, Amazon, Roku they're quite aggressive in this space. Why would TiVo be a significant player in this?
Yeah, I think as I mentioned, it's really that key approach to partnership as powered by versus controlled by maybe. The business model from a revenue share perspective brings longevity to the partnership. But then all the different elements of content discovery, which Andy Valdesby said a few minutes ago, the technical part of it is not that difficult from a search and recommendation. But if you get into true personalization, that becomes much more challenging, because you're way down into deep link metadata. And that's where people start to really stay engaged in the experience. So I think we can compete in that level, because the TV partners and the operator partners will actually see the longevity of revenue, but they'd also start to see churn rates being managed very carefully, because your audience are engaged and they're not coming in and out of things all the time. They're actually just using a unified area. So we're excited about it.
Yeah, so you actually see that TiVo has something different that you can differentiate in a way.
Yeah, and I think I would encourage people, if you want to get a preview, go onto Amazon and buy a TiVo 4K stick. That's essentially part of the UX and voice platforms that will move into the OS. So you'll get a real feel for how it's coming. So the back end subscriptions and stuff, you can come in and out of whatever you're subscribed for, and it'll just search across that and recommend across that. And then you can have a kind of a sponsor discovery area as well if you want to, based on your content profiles that you like. So personalization is very strong, and it's actually becoming more and more of a key differentiator, as well as people, if they only want to see certain things, but then more importantly, don't want to be recommended certain things, right?
Yeah.
And then you separate, for example, kids and adults it sounds easy, but that's an important thing to get accurate.
Yeah. So basically, if I interpret you correctly, you say sort of the heritage and the partnership that you bring from being sort of part of the old world is helping you with a segue into a new environment where you haven't been before.
That's right.
Interesting. How do you see that moving into the spaces? Because I think from a sort of an application point of view, from a set-top box point of view, the world has turned into becoming more and more agile and sort of more releases in shorter time. And do you see that change in a TV OS space where people are maybe not so familiar with that?
Well, I think you'll always have versions being deployed in regular spaces. It depends, or it's more about who's managing it, right? And what does the consumer or the TV partner experience when something like that is happening? Because sometimes, as I mentioned, in the controlled world, versions are deployed for you, let's say, and you have to play ball. Or in the partnership side of the house, more on the powered by, then it becomes more planned road mapping and more planned evolution. I think as you're still continuing with more and more content providers coming on board and more subscriptions coming on board, we're seeing that, and CTV is becoming more dominant in that space as we start to see that shift. I mean, in the US, I think it's roughly 9 subscriptions per household is an average. I mean, trying to search across 9 things is painful if you're coming in and out of all these different things. So I think that your app control elements will still remain, but it's more how it's managed in front of the consumer. Right.
Yeah. So having this environment where you can actually provide an end-to-end solution that's going to be a benefit.
Correct. And you know, as I go back to the monetization piece of it, because I think that's huge. I mean, in the world of software, there will always be versions and releases. That's fine, but it's more as people keep their eyes on the prize of getting a share of that revenue. An advertising business is a completely different ballgame than a hardware business, as someone mentioned this morning. The margins are completely different. But the TV OEMs in particular want to play in that space now. They're seeing the value that they're giving away at the moment, so in some cases. So they want to be able to have more skin in the game there, and you know, that's why we're going down that model.
And do you see this as a replacement for a set-top box, or as John asked Daniel earlier, do you see that there's a space for both, or how do you see the future in that?
No, I still think there's a space for both. I mean, we're seeing a lot of different customer feedback on you know, TVs being the dominant viewing portal, which I think is correct, and it will be the big screen. But I think we speak with a lot of operators already, many from the TiVo business, and you know, some are moving to app-based models on the box that pop up on, or moving it straight into a CTV app. But I think your traditional parts of the world as well will always, well, I won't say always, but for, I think Andy put a number on it, 10 years or something, will still remain with set-top boxes. I think there's a home for both.
Yeah.
But I do think more content, particularly if you don't have to move around sources and start looking for things, then the TV can become that main kind of entry point, right, that keeps you there.
Yeah, and with more and more sort of content owners going direct to consumers, you can be sort of the gateway and ensure that the aggregation is still in place, or how do you see that play forward? There's a lot of integrations with a number of players, whereas historically it's been more with the operator themselves.
Correct, yeah. So maybe because we have a few minutes left, one of our executive team is here from the US, Gear Scoden. Maybe Gear, you can pop up and have a few words, because I want to run out of time without you saying any gaps there. And maybe is there a microphone for Gear?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so maybe I'll pick on one thing that I think is interesting that maybe haven't been touched on so much, which I think we're very focused on, is, you know, the connected TV. There's a lot of focus on what we're going to push to the user, but I think the most interesting part is the connected TV talks back to the platform. And, you know, to Gabriel's point, well, the households we've serviced with video to home for a long time, as that gotten more sophisticated, it really opens the door for personalizing the experience, delivering completely different customization, and turning really the chaos of all the different content options into an empowering choice for the user. So I think in that area, I think we're very interested in partnering with everyone here and the industry at large to get better, because I think this is a learning cycle that just has tremendous opportunity. I think we're just scratching the surface on what you see as experience today, because I think the sea of apps in our world is a thing of the past. It's still what dominates the user interface, but it's not very consumer friendly if you think about how people now consume content with, you know, somewhere between 5 and 10 different subscriptions. And as I think that will increase as more platform adapt advertising, because then that reduces the friction of entering into the top services. So you'll be, from that, you'll probably want to taste more free things as a result of lower barrier of entry. So that again makes the options broader and the selection harder. So the power of solving that problem really is in the return path, understanding how the user engages and how different members of the household engages with the TV, and in that really driving the next level of user experience.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you for contributing.
Yeah.
I think just one final question before we have to end this. We've spoken a lot about TiVo and sort of what's ahead of us there, but just give us 30 seconds on what else you can bring to the table.
Xperi-wise, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Xperi hits a lot of areas. As I set the context at the start, I think we're doing a lot with in-cabin monitoring in the car and bringing that into the infotainment space as well. But I actually think, Sky Glass took a jump with camera and TV, gesture controls, other things like that. We operate right in the middle of that space as well. We have a computer vision business and engineering world that works in that. So as voice evolves, as personalization evolves, as people get less clicky with the remote because it's easier to find things, then people start to, well, maybe I can just control it, waving around. So I think the camera is always going to be an interesting one, but as that may be, gotten in front of by having what's called neuromorphic sensors actually in the TV, which can still provide recommendation and personalization, but actually is not a camera, right? It's just a closed circuit sensor, but it can actually pick up. So we're actually, that's one of the things we're talking about with customers, and trying to get that middle ground is keep people get more comfortable with the idea of cameras in homes over time. Somewhere down in the middle, it still allows that profiling to take place, that recognition of that's an adult, that's a child, actually that's Gabriel and Thomas. So we can switch the recommendations and what you're watching based on that identification. So those type of things are, as I mentioned, there's quite a few engineers in this space that we're working on. So there's a lot going on there. As well as, even things like web conferencing from the home and thing has been evolved. The gentleman from Deutsche Telekom was talking about far field mics and web conferencing and things like that. So there's a lot on our plate, but we're really strategically focused on CTV OS as a major priority, as a natural evolution of what we've all brought together from the legacy history of the DTS combination of things, all kind of converging into that, and getting into the more into the advertising monetization game, because that's a lot of money in that game, right?
That's a whole new discussion.
So someone mentioned this morning that Roku got it right, but I think TiVo understands it too. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Gabriel.
Yeah.
So please put your hands together for Gabriel. Thank you.